Hello, everyone, and welcome to One Civil Law. I hope you're having a great evening as always. And with me is my friend from New York, a man who helps keep me straight and in check and dispenses legal knowledge with the sword of justice. It is none other than Nate, the lawyer himself, who has graced us. Hello, Nate.
That was one hell of an entrance, man. How's everybody doing out there tonight? Yeah,
We're doing fine, man. Everything is good, man. It's been a crazy week, but then every week is crazy, and there's never going to be an end to the insanity. So there's that. And we have the COVID vaccines, and we have a variety of statements on when it will all be better. It will either be April, or it'll be the summer, or it'll be next year. Who knows? Fauci says maybe masks in 2022. I say maybe masks up his backside.
Listen, I'm going to be doing the mask thing for a while. I've already committed to mask wearing after the pandemic. I'm going to be like I'm going to be living in Japan or one of those Asian countries where they wear masks all the time. I just think I don't know why. I think masks are okay. I don't want people. It's like I feel like a extra level of anonymity when I'm wearing a mask, even though like nobody knows me, right? But it's like you put your mask on. I can rob a bank or I could be going to get a hamburger. Who knows? Who knows?
Yeah, Freedom. It'll be interesting how long. It'll be interesting how long you're allowed to go into banks wearing a mask. Because I was thinking about that for a second. It'll be interesting if at some point they're like, no, you can't wear masks anymore. But I thought we were supposed to mask.
It's like I'm surprised they're like not more like serious bank robberies, right? It's like he was wearing a mask and socially distancing.
Yeah, he was socially distancing. He was very courteous. He made sure to rob us from at least 6 feet away.
Right. Nobody can identify anybody. He had sunglasses on the mask. He's like, oh, can you? Everybody's wearing masks.
Hey,
everybody's wearing masks.
Back here, yeah. Don't get too close. Just put the money on the counter and I'll come and get it.
Oh my God.
Yeah, no, it's all good times. Well, we have a whole world of stupid that we want to discuss, and I think we should just get along with starting the stupid because the stupid doesn't wait, and so why should we be allowed to wait? Because we're all doomed. So our first stupid story of the day comes courtesy of Coca-Cola. I'll make this a little bigger so people can read it. That's always helpful. Coca-Cola, our favorite company in Atlanta, Georgia, raised some eyebrows for promoting an online trading seminar that urged employees to try to be less white in order to combat racial discrimination. Slides from the trading seminars were shared online this week. It features tips on how to tone down whiteness. I mean, you can't tone down whiteness. You're already the lowest tone it goes. Hey, yo. See what I did there?
I do.
Little play on words.
I do. I like it. Well,
the tips.
Continue to read. Go ahead.
The tips to be less white included. How do you be less white? This is how, Nate. Be less arrogant. Be less certain. Be less defensive. Be more humble.
Well, hold on. Stop. Stop with the list. That could be for any race.
No,
right?
We can't. No, it's not. Because no. Because even if you're a different race, those are all white traits. No, that's how this works now.
But go back to that list. That list is good for anybody, right? Go back to that list. Go ahead. Hit me with the list again.
Okay.
Be less arrogant.
Be less
certain. Be less defensive. Go ahead.
Be more humble. Listen, believe, break with apathy, and break with white solidarity. I would have a break. It doesn't matter what race you are, by the way. You can be white, and we're going to get to that in a very closely related story to this in a minute.
That would be the last one.
You can be any race, and you still have to purge your whiteness because that's how it works now. So these are exclusively white traits. If you have these traits, you might be white. Nate, are you white?
I don't know. That last one would.
Are you arrogant?
Break with the last one. The last one, the break with white solidarity.
Yeah.
I might have that's the one I might be able to escape on the technicality with. You know what I'm saying? Because it's just it's a eye test issue at that.
What is white
solidarity? But the other one, so I don't know what that is. But I'm saying, I'm not white. If I was white, it would be a different story. But all the rest of them, I'm with. Every other one can apply to me. The break with white solidarity. I think that's the tipping point. I don't even know what that means. What does that mean? Give me a definition of white solidarity. What do you white people do that's so different? Tell me.
I don't know. I have no information to offer you because I don't speak woke. But I could Google it right fast. This is Robin DiAngelo, some crap there, isn't it? There's a white theology of solidarity. Oh, it's getting more important. White theological response to racism requires explicit construction of an anti-racist white identity.
But
against notions that claim to be colorblind and focus exclusively on what all human beings have in common. A responsible white theology will unmask the specific ways in white interest operates and will make various meanings of white identity explicit.
Well, hold on. Let me. I think it's more helpful to explain why I think this is funny instead of just laughing at it. The reason why I think this is funny is because I think the traits that are listed are for any group, right? You want to be more humble. You want to be less confident. You want to be less defensive. I think those traits can apply to any group. They're very generic. It's assuming that one group are lacking in these traits when it can be true for any group, right? So, I don't know what evidence they'd have to back that up. And I also think that two things can be true at the same time. And one of those things is that we should all want to be better, right? We should all want to strive to be more inclusive in our lives. But I think on the flip side of that, no one wants to be forced to do something or just change who they are for some cause. And I think that's the issue that we're coming to here, is that we all want to be more inclusive, but to tell someone to be less white, it's like them to tell me to be less black. What does that just makes no sense. You know what I mean?
No, I'm supposed to be less white and you're supposed to be more black, whatever that means. Because white is bad and black is good.
Yes, we're not all the monoliths. No, we're not all monoliths.
Because you don't have power, apparently, so you can't be racist or something.
Yeah, this assumes that we're all a monolith, right? All white people are the same, all black people are the same. And that's just not true. It's it's funny. I was on Discord the other day, and I was in another Discord. And what did I write? I wrote the song "Walk Like an Egyptian." Me and my daughter, we were doing the whole.
That's cultural appropriation now.
That's crazy, right? Somebody actually made a beef with it, saying that those aren't real Egyptians. Those aren't real Egyptians. What are you doing?
No joke. You know what an Egyptian walks like? Pretty much the same as everyone else.
Yes, it was like, like, understand, it's a song, it's just having fun. But the person's like, you're being insensitive to the racial stereotype. Like nobody thinks Egyptians walk like that. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. I don't understand. Maybe I'm not sensitive enough to this. Probably you know what I mean?
But we'll move on to closely related story number 2 so that we can get even more infuriated, because while Coca-Cola telling its employees, who are presumably adults, is one thing, well, the New York Public City Schools would like to have a word with you. They would like to teach about the 8 white identities. Yes, this is super exciting stuff that we are teaching kids now. A city public school principal is asking parents to reflect on whiteness, passing out literature that extols white traitors who dismantle institutions. The woke offensive at the East Side Community School in Manhattan features a list titled "The 8 White Identities." Yeah, this is good. In between identities of supremacists and abolitionists are different categories. Okay, so first we'll give you the white identities, and then we're going to describe them. Okay, so from red to green, which one is presumably supposed to mean from bad to good. The 8 white identities, and Nate, you can tell me which white identity I'm in, okay? Because I'm not fit to judge myself because I'm trapped inside my own white matrix. So you can be white supremacist, white voyeurist, white privilege, white benefit. We'll get to the definitions of this.
All right.
What?
No. I was saying this whole system is actually just based on the Civil War race, right? It's white supremacists are people who wanted slavery, and white abolitionists are people who fought against slavery. So this chart is really just based on race, right? That's all this is. Yeah.
Well, no, it's not based on race so much as it's based on whiteness.
Well,
which I don't know if
racism.
that's racism.
I'm sorry, racism toward black people.
Yeah.
Because that's what white supremacists
Oh, no.
and abolitionists
No,
is.
Shaz says, "Oh, I'm so glad I'm a person of color." Oh, no, Shaz, you do not get off on this being a person of color. We're going to get to that in a second.
Go ahead.
No,
Hit it.
Shaz over here is like, I'm happy, I'm a person of color. Oh no, you're still on the chart. So we stopped at white confessional, white critical, white traitor, and white abolitionist. And you might be saying to yourself, what are these things? Am I one of these things? Well, I'm so glad you asked, because they have definitions for all of them. So we can read them together, and you can determine for yourself which of these identities you fall into. And remember, you must fall into one of them, because that's how it works. All right, if you're a white supremacist, you clearly mark white society that preserves, names, and values white superiority. Okie doke. If you are a white voyeurist, you wouldn't challenge a white supremacist. You desire non-whiteness because it's interesting and pleasurable. You seek to control the consumption and appropriation of non-whiteness, fascination with culture. For example, consuming black culture without the burden of blackness. Presumably, this would mean, for example, if I listen to rap music, but I don't fully take on blackness, whatever that is. I don't know how I would take on blackness, but if I don't, then I am merely a voyeurist. White privilege. You may critique supremacy, but you have a deep investment in the questions of fairness and equality under normalization of whiteness and white rule. Sworn goal of diversity. I guess I'm in this category because I actually believe in fairness and equality and diversity. So apparently my use of these terms means I'm in the white privilege camp somehow. Okay, now here's where the people of color kick in. So this is where the people of color might kick in. Sympathetic to a set of issues, but only stop with the banners. I'm trying to do something over here. I'm trying to make fun of things. Sympathetic to a set of issues, but only privately. Won't speak or act in solidarity publicly because benefiting through whiteness in public. And some people of color are in this category as well. So Nate,
this is white privilege or white benefit.
You might be in the white benefit category because even though you're black and even though you're a person of color, you might be in white benefit land somehow. White confessional, some exposure of whiteness takes place, but as a way of being accountable to a person of color afterwards, seeking validation. So this would be where you call me out and I only after the fact, like admit my wrongness, but I'm not proactive in it. So that would be the white confessional category. Only when I'm called out for being a bad white person do I confess my bad whiteness, but I'm not taking that next step. White critical, taking on board critiques of whiteness and investment in exposing, marking the white regime, refusing to be complicit with the regime. Whiteness, speaking back to whiteness. Apparently I'm supposed to speak back to whiteness somehow. White traitor, actively refuses complicity, names what's going on. Intention is to subvert white authority and tell the truth at whatever cost, need to dismantle institutions. And finally, the white abolitionist, changing institutions, dismantling whiteness, and not allowing whiteness to reassert itself. So which of these fun categories do you think I am, and which of these fun categories do you think you are, Nate? These are the existential questions we didn't know we'd be asking today.
Number one, this was taught in a school? To who? What grade was this taught in?
I don't know if it said what grade, but I think it's high school. So that'll be 14 through 18, presumably. But it's only a matter of time before it goes down the chart. One would think.
Number one, I'm assuming this isn't really approved material from the school board. You know what I'm saying? I'm assuming this isn't material.
This principal thought it was a super good idea.
Yeah, but even though this principle, maybe this principle is one thing, but I'm talking about, there's usually an approved curriculum that, the state pays for books and so forth and so forth. So I'm not sure if they're following the curriculum. If that's in the curriculum, that's crazy. Number two, it seems to be very subjective, right?
Oh, no.
What I mean by that is the whole list seems to be just based on whether you're for or against slavery, right? And that's kind of like in the gradations in between. And it just gives names to random events, like, hey, this person, white privilege is this is this. I think it's interesting because they always say the road to hell is paved with good intentions. And I think this is one of those instances where the person had a good intention to explain when a kid hears white supremacist, what does that mean? When a kid hears white privilege, what does that mean? You know what I'm saying? Try to explain those concepts. and they put it in this. This is the way that they try to explain those concepts to children. I think it was poorly done. I think you just define them. This is what, when someone says white privilege, this is what it means. When someone says this, this is what it means. But here it seems like they tried to meld them all together and give them this whole grand design, which makes absolutely no sense. I do think that, if we're talking about just overall, there is white privilege. We all understand that, right? But I'm saying I don't think you can blame the son for the sins of the father. I believe that we all want to be better. And the fact that, yes, there's definitely disparagement about just crime rates, poverty, so forth and so forth. But we strive to be better. But we can't just see everything as racist. And I don't think we can just demonize a whole race for things that they've done in the past, especially when the whole thing now is we want to be better. We want equal rights for everybody. That's what you're saying. That's what everybody's saying. But it's like we're not saying it the same way. I don't understand the conflict here. If I say racism is bad, I don't know. Republicans, Democrats, everyone agrees with that.
Yeah.
But it seems like we're disagreeing on what the definition of racism is. You know what I'm saying?
Well, it's not enough to go with the Scalia of the best way to stop discrimination is to stop discrimination, which I always love that line. When he's talking about
VMI, right?
Affirmative action. Yeah, I think it was
that was a VMI. Yeah, that was VMI.
But I love that quote from Scalia. The best way to stop discrimination is stopping discrimination. Yeah. And but apparently that's not enough, because merely by stopping discrimination, I'm accepting the white power structure as it already exists and talking about terms like equality and fairness, and heaven forbid I use a word like merits. Whoa, heaven forbid I use that. I'm just merely reinforcing the white patriarchy or something.
But you know what, though? I'll ask you something. I'll ask you something about that. Let's talk about just merit, right? And this, I think, will be a conflict just between left and right. When I was a professor in law school for 2 years. I was a law school lecturer, and toward the end of my tenure, I was the director of a program that was trying to get more black men into law school. Mm-hmm. And the problem is that the average score on the LSAT for a black male is 142. Now, for those of you who don't know, the LSAT is
not bad.
The LSAT, just for everybody who doesn't know out there, the LSAT ranking is 120 to 180, right? 180 being the top score, 120 being the low score. 150 is an average score. So the average black score was a 142. The average Hispanic score, for instance, is a 138. Very, very low scores. The average white score is a 153. So if a black person was to score a 153, they would be an exceptional black person on that test, right? Because you'd be in the upper 75th percentile if you scored a 153 as a black person versus as a white person. So what is the difference? Why do we have, and that difference, the difference between how black score, white scores, and Hispanic scores are not just specifically for the LSAT, it's for every test. So, SATs, whatever test you take, there's always that gap. That gap is there between black test takers, white test takers, and Hispanic test takers. There's always this particular gap. No one understands why the gap is. If right now somebody in the chat can figure out why we have that gap, you win a Nobel Prize. That gap is just something that people just don't understand why that gap is there. And that gap, the interesting part about it is that gap goes across socioeconomic status. Mm-hmm. So it's not like, it's just poor people, white people. It's just this. So yeah, LSAT is low school admissions test. So one of the interesting things is that right now, the most common academic understanding of this is that this is a generational issue in terms of things like whitelining or redlining, I should say, where black families weren't allowed to invest in homes to get more money and things of that nature, so they can build individual wealth. That's why the average wealth of a white family is like $250,000, while the average wealth of a black family is like $15,000. This is the reason why you have this discrepancy. So it's not like there isn't a problem. It's how do you fix the problem? Because the problem wasn't, the problem didn't happen overnight. The South and the Voting Rights Act, those things didn't happen overnight. Those things were institutionalized over hundreds of years. And the issue now is, how do you get to the point where you don't have that wealth gap? How do you get to the point where you don't have that gap in LSAT scores? How do you, where we know the poor schools If you go to New York City, the poorest and most underperforming schools are in the ghetto or in the black neighborhoods. The best and most and highest performing schools are actually in the white neighborhoods here, Scarsdale, New York. How do we even that out? That's what I'm trying to understand.
Yeah, I think all that makes total sense. Why there are these gaps. I mean, people have tried to study them forever, and it's not clear. You could point to a lot of potential factors. Some factors that are obvious, but as Nate points out, it even tracks wealth. So presumably that would take care of educational factors. So you could be looking to family factors, environmental factors. That would be like an environmental factor. How families are raised or the differences therein and stuff like that. But yeah, it's beyond my pay grade to be able to speculate. But I think everyone should be striving to be the best that they can be, and the best people should be able to excel. And I think what you do in trying to encourage more Black people to go to law school and trying to encourage and cultivate that is perfectly fine. Because you want to expose people to opportunities they might not be familiar with or have considered. So I think that's good. Nice little super chat here. No redheads allowed to take the LSAT. All problems fixed. Well, thanks, Nick. I appreciate your love here.
Why didn't Nick get on here? Nick, why don't you come on, brother? What's going on?
I could send you the link, Nick, if you want to hop on stream.
Yeah,
I'll send him the link. I'll just send him the link, and if he wants to, he can. So yeah, because we're doing this on StreamYard, so I can. So let me go over here and send him the link and see if he wants to. No, I need to invite. That's what I want to do. Okay, go over here. Go over here.
What are you like sending a formal invite? Just DM him on Twitter.
I'm working on it. I'm working on it. Calm down.
I had some peach brandy, which is amazing stuff. Just to let you guys know, the moonshine version. It's like amazing.
Yeah. All right. So I sent him the link if he wants to join. Okay, great.
Cool.
Problem solved. All right. Fantastic. Now, where was I? We were back here. Okay. Problem. Now, next story. Okay. We are going to move on to we don't need to do the race thing again. We're moving on to the Capitol riots and what we have learned or what we have not learned as a result of all that. So let me just add that to this. No, I want to add to the stream. Thank you very much. The Capitol defenders have cited missing intelligence as being their primary reasons, as noted by the AP here, for what happened at the Capitol. They primarily have said that missing intelligence is to blame for the outmanned Capitol. The officials have pointed fingers at herself, and apparently the primary factor is that the former Capitol police chief, who resigned, said that they were expecting the protest to be similar to two other pro-Trump events, and apparently they had not seen the FBI field report that warned of potential violence, citing online posts about a war. So they were caught off guard because they thought it would be more similar to other protests they had seen and were just not equipped. And as for calling the National Guard, we haven't heard more specific details, but has been quoted before. The National Guard is not a 911 service. You have to stage them and you have to have them ready. So it's not something you can just call and like have troops just show up. It takes a little bit more effort, especially if you're going to do it any kind of size. I mean, if you're sending like a small number of National Guard, to deal with a minor incident, then it's not that big a deal. But if you're sending something to deal with this kind of scale, then you can't just do it on the fly. So yeah, what do you think about the testimony, what we have learned or what we have not learned from all this stuff?
Well, I did a video on this earlier today. And just to be clear, I predicted this like January 11th, right? I did like a whole 2-part video of how law enforcement failed, straight out. I got to say it again, failed when it came to this thing, when it came to the Capitol Hill riots. They were understaffed. When you look at the video, they had 5 officers trying to hold back thousands of protesters. In which sane world does that happen? Now, yeah. I do understand that President Trump said some bad things and, his constitutionally protected speech, because I think every lawyer who's sane is going to say his speech was constitutionally protected, political speech. And with him saying the word peaceful. Go ahead.
I think there's been some minor disagreement, but I think that
who disagrees with that?
Law Twitter. Well, Twitter
Like,
disagrees with that.
listen, I think every sane lawyer, even legal, says that speech is more than likely protected political speech. He said the words peaceful. Go down there and peacefully protest. What more do you need to say?
Yeah. So I don't know what we'll learn about all this or if we'll get more information, but we're doing the whole 9/11 commission style thing, and I guess we'll get a big fat report at the end of it. That we get some light reading.
We don't need anything. We know what happened. What happens is, unfortunately, this was a calamity of many different things. President Trump's madness about the election. We know the election wasn't stolen. He lost by like 8 million votes. Come on, people, just kind of wake up on that.
Yeah.
I hate calling. You got me calling him woke, but you got to wake up. The guy lost by 8 million votes. It wasn't close. But okay, so Trump loses the election. He says he doesn't win. Blah blah blah. He said, don't forget when Trump lost the other election with Ted Cruz. He said Ted Cruz stole the election and was stuffing ballots. So he has a history of saying that. But anyway, so he says that. He then goes and tells the people to go out there and peacefully protest. They go. When they go there, they got 5 Capitol Police drinking mojitos, chilling on the steps, and you got 20,000 protesters. That was a recipe for disaster. I'm sorry, it was a recipe for disaster. They said they're not taking this seriously. And then you got to overrun in the building. So the Capitol Police chief, what he said yesterday was, number one, they didn't train for people taking over the building. Now think about this. He said that the Capitol Police weren't trained to stop people from taking over the building. What the hell do we got the Capitol Police for? Right? That's their whole job is to protect the Capitol complex. And he has the nerve to say we weren't trained to protect, in case people raided the complex. What the hell are you there for? Why the hell are we calling you Capitol Police? That's your only job is to protect the Capitol. And you don't train. Like, come on. You know what I'm saying? So don't get me wrong. I think Trump has his
Oh, there he is. There's the man himself. Hey.
Oh, there he is.
Hey, what's up, guys?
It's great to have you here.
Nick, what's up, man?
Oh, not much. You're talking about my favorite subject, which is the Capitol Police not doing what they're supposed to do.
Now, if I'm not mistaken, I believe you've listened to most, if not all, of this testimony because you're a masochist.
Oh yeah, why are you listening? You're like, every day you're like, get it, boy.
No, I didn't. I didn't listen to this one. I wanted to, but I was too wiped out to do it after listening to the GameStop hearing and then the Attorney General Merrick Garland hearing, which made me want to find a short pier and walk.
He doesn't appear to know any law because every time someone asks him a legal question, he's like, I don't know the answer. I'm like, I know more of these than you do, apparently. So maybe I should be the Attorney General.
But isn't it what they all do when they get up there? Nobody knows nothing. I can't remember. That's the way it rolls,
Is there even a border on the southern United States?
Who knows?
I've never heard of that.
Interesting question.
There's a southern border now?
Yeah. Oh, I thought he was just talking about the eastern border. Oh man.
Yeah.
But
listen, if you guys expect them to go to answer questions, you guys are at the wrong place. Come on, be honest. Be honest. What nominee answers questions?
Since Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who is the one who probably started this party more than anyone else, who came in with the non-answer answer, and it's been that way ever since. So yeah, no one answers the question anymore. So RBG's legacy continues.
You watch him to listen for good questions more than you watch him to listen for good answer. But no, I didn't watch the Capitol Police one. I read some of the reporting on it as it was happening, and I was blown away, of course, by the fact that none of the publications I read were blaming Trump. I couldn't figure it out. It's like weird. they have the opportunity to blame Trump and all this, and it doesn't seem like any of the witnesses were blaming him.
You know what I think at the end of the day, this whole impeachment, the second impeachment, had to deal with the insurrection and the fact that they were able to get so close, right? They were banging on the doors, right? The congressman on the other side. That's why Trump was impeached. But I'll ask this: if the Capitol Police were properly prepared and they were able to keep those people out of the buildings, do you think Trump would have gotten a second impeachment? I say no.
No.
I don't think so.
And if you look at my video, thanks for sharing that video, by the way. When you look at that video, if you look at the comments, there are so many people who say, yeah, but even though Trump incited the riot, I think if you really think about it, if that riot doesn't happen, Trump doesn't get the second impeachment. But for the second impeachment, Trump gets impeached. And I think that was, and there's no one that can honestly tell me that riot wasn't caused by incompetence at the Capitol Police level, because they could have stopped it, especially if you know what's coming, right? They knew it was coming. This wasn't like it was a secret. There was no secret here, and they couldn't stop it. That was the problem.
Yeah, that the incitement, that the event to be incited occurs is not an element of the charge of incitement. So it would be equally inciting legally whether the riot happens or not. Now, whether the riot happens or not might have something to do with liability at the tail end or damages when we're measuring the sentence. So it might come in for that purpose, but it wouldn't come in for underlying liability. It's not an element of the charge. It's not something they have to prove. They have to prove you incited, not that it did in fact occur. They only have to prove that it was likely to occur. They don't have to prove it did occur. So
can we consign that to an email and send it to Jamie Raskin so he can understand how incitement works?
Well, he could just read Brandenburg.
Yeah, obviously he can read Brandenburg. One of the craziest things was the DC, I think, acting police chief said that the FBI, because they were saying the FBI didn't tell us nothing. So one of the senators was like, well, the FBI sent you a bulletin. And that bulletin said they're coming for war, right? They're like, coming for war.
They're bringing slingshots and everything.
so they're like, they sent you a bulletin. Why didn't you read the bulletin? The guy, instead of saying, I didn't get the bulletin, he could say, I didn't read it because, it's email. He said, if it was really that important, why would they send it in the email? It's like, wow, is that really his answer? Did he really just say that? If it was important, I send important stuff in emails, of course. But if it was really,
I send it to a junk folder. I don't really read these things.
Look,
FBI,
he got the email. He got the email, though.
So boring.
If it's not by Strippergram, I don't even want to get
it. But it's like easy. It's like, yeah, but if it was serious, they'd have called me. No, they might send you a fucking email.
Yeah, I found that interesting. What I really want to know, and I think tomorrow they're having a hearing in the House on this, which will be the House hearings are usually a little spicier, I think, than the Senate hearings.
Oh yeah.
You got more idiots talking, and two, they're like, the Senate gets this regal aura, like I'm a senator, like as if they're somehow important, but the House members have a little rough and tumble left in them. And so what they're going to be doing tomorrow. And Pelosi's already ahead of it by going ahead and capturing phone records through the FBI of Republicans from the House floor on the riot day. Now, the Republicans are going to be following up on that Capitol Police chief going, when you said that the other guy said he was waiting for information from congressional leadership, who are we talking about here?
Names. It's time to name names.
Yeah, because apparently I don't know the organizational structure of the Capitol Police, but it sounds like there's a sergeant at arms that reports to the House Majority Leader and a sergeant at arms that reports to the Senate Majority Leader. Yeah, and in that case, that's what Pelosi, and had it switched yet?
Not at the time.
No, not at the time. No.
So Pelosi and McConnell.
Yep.
Yes.
And so it's like, okay, why, if they have the authority to deploy the National Guard, why didn't they do it? I mean, they're there. The defenses are being overrun and you're in the building. Like, if I'm the king, I'm calling in the knights. That's all I'm saying. And I want those questions answered. I think that'll be really uncomfortable.
I don't know if we'll learn anything at the end of the day except Trump bad. And they're installing. What I'm more concerned about is some of the permit changes they're making, some of these permit fences and stuff. And, they made huge changes after 9/11 with the whole Capitol Visitor Center. So it's like, what are they going to do now?
Well, look, we don't need access to the Capitol. People shouldn't be able to go there.
We've got C-SPAN.
It's what's been going on is that I think at the end of the day, this was a one-off event that I think it was like the domino effect. It just had a lot of things that just happened wrong at the same time, and unfortunately what happened was what happened. I think moving forward though, I think Then supposedly you're smart to get the phone records. I think that's playing politics. You know, if I was there, I would get the phone records. I don't know if you two guys were there, would you guys get the phone records? If I can legally do it and I have access to it, I'm going to check them out. Right? Yeah, hell yeah, I'm going to see you call it, or you call the president. You know what I'm saying? So, you know, even though don't get me wrong, I understand the implications of doing it. I just think it's shrewd political maneuvering.
Do you think? The impeachment might have gone better if they had evidence?
No, I think the impeachment went as well as they thought they could have gone, because let's just be clear, Trump wasn't getting convicted. Is any sane person out there who thought Trump was actually going to get convicted? I just think you try to get as many.
If they had rushed it and pushed it, maybe.
No, but hold on. You're trying. Their job was to try to get as many Republican votes so they can get a presser as they did, and they did. They got 7 Republican votes, and they can say this is the most bipartisan impeachment ever. That's what that's what they were going for. They were going for conviction. If you think they were going to conviction, they fooled you. They weren't.
Do you think they could have convicted if they would have had, a phone record of one of these, like Tario, the Proud Boy leader guy? He calls up Trump. Trump answers. They talk for 8 minutes during the Capitol riots after Trump's speech. What do you think about that? I mean, I think if they had something like that, they could nail him.
No. I still don't think that wins. I'll tell you why I won't. Why Trump would have not gotten convicted. Let me make it very clear. There's a primary. Trump just got 74 million votes. These people are up for election in 2 years. They are voting. They will not convict. There's nothing you can say that Mike Lee is not going to vote to not convict.
Mike Lee was definitely a hero, though.
I think you may get 60 votes at most. But you're not getting 17 Republican votes. Not when these people know that they got to face Trump voters in the primaries. And Trump is sitting there saying, I'll see you at the primary. I don't think you get 17 votes. I think the fear of losing your job is that much where you don't get 17 votes. Even with that.
I can't believe you don't have faith in the integrity of the U.S. Senate. I am shocked and appalled, sir.
No, listen. Most people don't know. And was it Andrew Johnson? Most people believe the senators who acquitted him, right? He lost by 1 vote. Most people believe the senators, Republican senators that switched their side, they were bribed. And it's weird because if you look back at the history, people think the senators were actually bribed to vote. One got like a house and all that stuff, and it's in the Congressional. Was it in the Congressional record? I think they did.
Houses weren't that expensive back then. It was way different. That's
taking a bribe.
No. You get a house back in the 1800s. That's like $30. That's not a big deal.
Yeah, $30 back in that money is like $1 million in this money.
Well, I would like to talk about another issue, and before I talk about this issue, I must give the standard disclaimer, which is that we are in no way suggesting that the election was stolen, or that Biden did not win the election, or that there was fraud on a scale that could have changed the election in any way, but purely for purposes of noting someone else who may have suggested something to the contrary. Okay. I thought we would talk about this. This is a note from Tim Pool here, who noted that Steve Crowder had been suspended from Twitter after saying that he could confirm that some people might have voted from addresses that do not exist. So apparently what Steven Crowder did was he traveled to addresses based on publicly available information. So he downloaded voting information and he ran the names, and apparently some of the names were criminals of some variety. And when he went to the addresses that they were registered at, some of those addresses did not exist. They were in the middle of freeways, or they were vacant plots or things like that. So he thought maybe there could be some suggestion. And of course, to please the algorithm, we would never suggest such a thing. But what do you think about the censorship of stories that are this is something you talked about already, I think, Rakita, talked about how we have to watch what we're saying, even as we're providing legal analysis, because we're so concerned about the censorship and suggestions to the contrary.
Well, I mean, I think Crowder has this neat luxury of, it's not a luxury. I'm underselling that, but he created the Mug Club for this very purpose. Crowder is monetized and supported through his own sort of independent mechanisms, and he can take a Twitter suspension or a Facebook suspension every now and then, and eventually try and weasel his way back into it. But the whole idea is that he's bought himself some freedom to comment on this. But I think it's terrifying. I mean, here you go, and we've seen this wherever, and of course. Sorry, we've got a multi-phasic problem here. One of them is that the fraud in elections is never addressed because it's always too small. It's always too small. You've got, well, this one person just cast 6 votes. Well, 6 votes isn't changing any election on the planet. So it's not that big of a deal. You don't have very many convictions. These things are never, ever addressed. And I think what we've got in 2020 is people seeing a whole lot of things that were too small and wondering if in the aggregate they weren't. And so you've got that problem. The other problem you've got is that now social media platforms are so hypersensitive that if you actually go to the place, like you go on, and you know what they did? They got the data, they pulled up Google Maps, and they just started plugging in addresses, and it's a parking lot in the middle of a city center. And they're like, wait a minute. Or I know one of the allegations in Vegas before that. Do you guys remember when Nevada was like, had all this stuff that was about to happen leading up to the actual certification, and then all that just kind of went away. But they had allegations that people were voting from hotel rooms and other things like that. And there may be a legitimate purpose or reason behind that. I'm not familiar with Nevada law, but it raised a lot of questions for people. These things, you couldn't even talk about them anymore, though. Because if you suggested that they happened and that they were improper and that they might have impacted the election, you were gone. And I think that's dangerous because we should be able to report on facts that exist. Without,
I have a not insignificant number of videos on my channel that have been demonetized from covering particular topics, particularly if I'm covering a subject like child custody or a university where the male gender might be the one that is prevailing. Which,
yes.
You know, they seem to really dislike that when they seem to really dislike it when it's a child custody case and the guy actually succeeds. And, you know, it's killing my growth on my channel in not insignificant part because it's not just the money. It's the fact that those stories are not spread and that people can't find them and the channel is hurting for it. So it means I have to be much more careful with the wording I do. I have to start beeping out certain words. Now I have these long, convoluted introductions sometimes when it's a particularly sensitive topic. Because like, okay, now I have to completely rewrite this on the fly in my head because I can't say certain things. And people are like, why aren't you just reading the words? I'm like, algorithm. I don't know what to do here. So it's like, and I was watching a broadcast with Viva Fry, who was talking to Dr. Drew and Dave Rubin and someone else as well, who was on it, talking about this exact same issue. The medical doctors don't feel like they can talk openly about various things, and the lawyers don't feel like they can talk openly about various things. And Viva pointed out, or maybe it was Drew who pointed out, Dr. Drew who pointed out, that certain things are settled and a lot of things aren't. And when we can't even have, you know, collegiate discussions about various topics so that I can check myself and you can check yourself, that's really annoying.
You know what? I
that's a legal way to put it. Really
I don't want to be. I don't know. I feel like I'm conflicted with this, and you know, I do understand both sides, and I'm conflicted in this sense. On one end, I'm a free market economist, baby, right? I'm a capitalist. If you say what's the best system, I'm a capitalist. America, you know, we are number one. This is the way it works, you know. So with that comes some consequences. I'm a free market guy. This is their company, their house. I can't go into your house, Nick, and do what I want, right? You can say, I don't want they brought in my house, and you can kick me out, right?
Yeah, because we're not in California.
But it can be whatever. Well, no, even in California, because your right to exclude is a powerful thing. You have the right to exclude based on anything, right? If I said I don't want to be around anybody else unless they're black, I have the right to do that, and I have the right to that environment in my home if I choose to do that. Obviously, that's sick. I wouldn't do something like that, but that's what I'm saying. So when it comes to these companies, because we, even though we all have little small businesses, I feel like they have the right to do this. They have the right to say, hey, if you want to make money on this platform doing this stuff, this is what you can't say these things. And you know what? I have a choice. This is not a government, right? When the government says something, I got no choice. So then they got to protect my rights. But here I got a choice. I don't got to do their stuff. I can go to Rumble, I can go this, I can go to that. Now, if we're talking about how big these companies are and how we really don't have a choice, that's a different conversation. But the core principle of them being able to say, we want these things on our platform, we don't want these things on our platform. If the argument is, I want to force them to have these other points of view public, right? I want to force them to allow me to say these things that they don't want me to say. I disagree with that. Why? Because it's a free market economy, right? I can't force you to say what you don't want to say. But I also think you can make the argument that these companies are too big to fail, where YouTube is the only game in town. So essentially, it's almost like a government. But again, I think you got to make that argument because right now, YouTube is the only game in town. I do understand Google, YouTube, the monopolistic ways that, it's hard to get away from it. Big tech, I understand it. But we can't have it both ways. Either we're free market economists or we're socialists. Have at
it. Well, I think there's something in there. I would just simply take note that the idea of common carriers and being able to force them to spread messages is not unheard of. The phone lines are forced to provide any message that they want, and the idea that these companies are so large and there's many places that should in some way accommodate speech that they personally don't like when they reach a certain tier is not exactly unheard of in this context. The other thing that I sort of noted is I really like the DOJ's proposal for Section 230 reform. Their proposal essentially amounted to just be honest in your business speech. Just have honest commercial speech. Say exactly what your rules are. Be clear about them. Don't make statements that are inconsistent with them, and enforce them evenly and give people a chance to appeal. And I'm like, well, that seems fair enough because you're not allowing people to hide the ball. So you can't say, we're an open platform and then we're not so much buried deep in a term of condition. You're not allowed to do that. You'd not be allowed to do that under those things, which seems fine because you're just being honest in your business speech. So yeah, but maybe you're right. Maybe you're right, Nate. Maybe I shouldn't be looking at this as skeptically as I am because YouTube can have any speech they want. And maybe I should just pick law stories that aren't so bad. Unfortunately, a lot of them are, but I guess we'll curate harder.
No, I wish it was an easy answer, right? I wish it was an easy answer. What they're doing is ridiculous, right? We all agree what they're doing is ridiculous. But my issue is not whether what they're doing is ridiculous. We all agree on that. It's just whether they have the legal right to do it, and what are the consequences of saying that they don't have the legal right to do it. I think the consequences of that are too great. I think the consequence of saying they can't do what they want to do with their company, I think it's too great. I think it violates that free market principle. That's my whole argument. Now I do, but I do understand if you get too big to fail, then you've lost that right? It's Marsh v. Alabama. You can't be the only utility in town and not want to give, and then be able to pick and choose, right? There are certain businesses and industries that are so important to life and liberty and pursuit of happiness that, they can't, say we're not going to give electricity to Hispanic people, for instance. But that's so that's Marsh v. Alabama. So what I'm saying here is that has YouTube become that entity? Because if the argument is just that YouTube shouldn't censor conservatives, yes, agree in principle, but legally, I think they can do it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think they can. Clearly, they're doing it a lot. There's any efforts to push back are being met with fierce resistance. So it's evident that they can legally do it, at least to some extent. I think the questions The questions come really around a lot of people who probably don't have the money to fight about it. And that's the hardest part in all this stuff is if there are claims, and I think there are cogent contract claims that can be made against these companies, because I don't think that their adhesion contracts should protect them as much as they do. And I think if we could attack at those contracts enough, we would do well. The problem is the people who are, if YouTube is a big enough gig that it's their job, and then they start suing YouTube, they're going to lose that job, or they just did lose that job. One of those two things. And if they just did lose that job, they're probably not looking at forking out a couple $100,000 on a legal fee. They're probably trying to figure out what they can do next to recover. But I think that there is some sort of issue. And I'll use me as an example. What happened to me the other day, which I'm sure was just a complete mistake, but I had a live stream taken down in the middle of the stream. And they sent me a notification that I was using someone else's content, which wasn't true. I mean, I guess I was using the Senate's content.
Yeah, I remember that. That was ridiculous. I don't know why that happened.
Explain to them the finer points of 17 USC 105.
So you take that, but then you take what they said to my audience, which is anybody who clicked on that video saw scam, spam, and deceptive practices.
Oh my God.
I mean, there's an argument that's per se defamatory. I mean, this is my profession in a lot of ways. I'm someone who reports on these issues. I try to build up trust and rapport with my audience. And then you come in and tell them that I violated their terms of service by spam and deceptive practices suddenly, or a scam of some sort. Like, okay, we now have a business defamation thing. But at the same time, if I sue YouTube over that business defamation claim, like well, they'll just say, okay, you're off the platform. That's once that lawsuit's over, you're off the platform. And that would be detrimental to me to actually do it. Plus my damages are pretty low in general. So, I might be able to win on a per se theory, but once I go to prove out those damages, it's not going to be much of anything unless I could get some punitive award. Now, I probably would have an avenue because they've got to have knowledge of the falsity, right? Because they sent me the other issue personally. But making all those arguments is very expensive. And at the end of the day, the platform's gone. And I think that's a problem with sort of the structure and how their business model is set up to insulate them, because they are the source of income for people. And the other aspect of it that I think needs a look is the fact that they are income generating platforms. And at some point, and we talked about this on Eric Hunley's channel a little bit, was that, if you went to work at a office that you rented and this happened, you would have legal recourse, but you just don't seem to have it on the digital world, in the digital space. And that is the problem, I think. And I think 230 has provided an absolute liability bar on all civil claims related to the moderation of content. And there are tortious interference style claims and other things that should not be protected under 230, in my opinion. So I think it needs to be pared back. I think 230 is really important and should stay largely, but just a second, lady. Just a second.
But how would you reform 230?
I think one is what Kurt's talking about, and that is, clarifying the language to say that, be honest in what your policy is and open and transparent about it. Nothing vague. We need to be able to know exactly what the limits are. Like, and YouTube, to its credit, I mean, their voter issues that they don't want people to talk about, at least they communicated those pretty clearly. Now, I think there's wiggle room on that, and it's, but if we're quibbling over like how far a policy goes, that's different than quibbling over what a policy even is. So I think that's one thing. Make your statements clear. Make them concise. But I do think they need to get rid of otherwise objectionable from 230. I think that if they struck those 2 words from 230, you're like 90% of the way to having a fixed law, in my opinion.
That'd go a long way.
I just don't think that there should be that much discretion to say, this is otherwise objectionable to me, therefore we can go ahead and ban you and take away an income that you've built up. It's almost like, do we get a quantum Merowit claim or something? Like what do we get to fight back against this when an entire profession is ripped out from under someone?
I know that
rankles
Crowder's trying to go for fraud as his theory, basically. So, but he's going to run into 230 problems. But maybe he can find a door in there somewhere, but it's tough. But I think we can move on from this because we're talking about free speech that's not as much in the First Amendment domain. But let's move on to speech that's a little bit closer to the First Amendment domain. Congress is being stupid. So some members of Congress have sent a letter to various people asking them to basically take down particular channels that they don't like. And when members of Congress are writing letters that seem a little bit, please take down these networks, the First Amendment starts popping into my mind.
Yep.
So here's what happens. See if I can make this a little bit larger because it's very hard to read at that site. So some Democrats on the House Energy and Commerce Committee. So that would be a committee that's definitely responsible for it. Did we lose Nate? Oh, yeah, we did. Okay. All right. Anyways, they have sent a letter to cable and telecommunications companies to ask them how they're handling disinformation. And what they classify as disinformation is a little bit different than what you might. So our country's public discourse is plagued, this is the letter, plagued by misinformation, disinformation, conspiracy theories, and lies. Nearly half of Americans get their news primarily from TV. However, not all TV news sources are the same. Some purported news outlets have long been misinformation rumor mills and conspiracy theory hotbeds that produce content on leads to real harm. Misinformation on TV has led to our current polluted information environment, radicalizes individuals to commit seditious acts, and reject public health best practices, among other issues. The letters proceeded to call out by name Fox News, Newsmax, and One American Network, causing them key vectors of spreading misinformation, vectors like disease vectors. So that was written by Representatives Anna Ishio and Jerry McNary of that committee. It was sent to AT&T, Comcast, Verizon, Amazon, Apple, Charter Communications, Cox Communications, Dish Network, Alphabet, which is Google, and Hulu, among others. So there's a little bit of First Amendment for you. And then they had some questions. They asked 7 specific questions to each of these CEOs, asking them about what moral or ethical principles are involved to carry channels, whether they have guidelines. And then they asked this final question, in case the point wasn't driven home: are you planning to continue carrying Fox News, Newsmax, and OANN on Roku, both now and in the future? If so, why? So I think that might trigger some legitimate First Amendment concerns. What do you think, Nick?
Yeah, it sounds like one of these good old principles in the First Amendment we call a chilling effect.
Chilling effect, yes, I seem to remember those words.
Yeah, where it's almost like the gangster move of, look, I don't want to say anything, but maybe
nice business you have here. I think you need a little protection.
This place is really nice. I'm not sure I like those pictures on the wall over there. Those are a little bit, I mean, the decor is pretty good. You got this 50s thing going on, and those seem a little out of place to me.
And I can't help noticing that the health inspector is going to be here in 20 minutes. So hope that works out for you. Yeah, that's basically the equivalent of it. It's like, the health inspector or the building inspector or the inspector dealing with wages or whatever, OSHA, health and safety, OSHA coming through. Yeah. It's like, it'd be so much better for OSHA if those pictures weren't up. And maybe you made your coffee a little cheaper.
They look like a fall. They look like a fall hazard. That's what
they look like. A fall hazard to me. Yeah, it could fall off the wall at any time.
Yeah, the
light could come in and reflect off the glass and blind somebody.
I saw someone today, and I want to say it was a conservative. It was a conservative Twitter account, a female. I can't remember who it was. I wish I would have liked it or tweeted. I didn't like it though. Retweeted it or something and made fun of it so I could find it again. But basically, they said, no matter what happens, if Congress is asking these places to take the channels down, if they get taken down, it's the private companies taking them down. So basically suggesting that there's nothing untoward going on. I'm like, well, let's hold up a little bit on that, because if the government threatens you even or even suggests a hint of a threat, and that results in the curtailing of a right, or interfering with a right, then we might have something to talk about there.
Yeah, I think so. If I were legal counsel for any of these organizations, I think my response would be some professional version of get bent.
Yeah. That is the professional version of
get bent. No, just all the no. We're not going to answer any of these questions, and remind you that the First Amendment exists, and the very first word of which is Congress. By the way, that's you guys, just in case you forgot somehow. But yeah, you can't. We're not going to answer these questions about who we do and do not carry. So go away. That would be my response, and I would be debating very hard in my own head, which is probably why I'm not corporate counsel, because corporate counsel would write a very professional response. If it were me, I'd be thinking about very non-professional responses.
Yeah,
because I'm so irritated by this. But yeah, so that's probably not why Cox is going to give me a call, unless maybe Fox News will give me a call. I'll tell them to stuff it.
Yeah, can I be corporate counsel for OANN? It seems like they'd be okay with what I would have to say. Like, how many middle fingers can I photocopy and include in response letters? Are you guys okay with that?
Yeah. Oh no, I'll interpret the entire thing as a complaint that they're not getting that on their network. So I'll misinterpret the entire letter. We've received your letter. We understand that you're disappointed that you're not currently getting OANN on your feed. Rest assured, we are looking at bringing OANN into your network in the very near future. We are very sorry for this oversight. Signed, OANN. I was like, that's what I do. Just misinterpret it completely. We know that you recognize the value of OANN and our 3 million customers or whatever it is, something like that. Just be really cheeky.
Hey, weren't they beating Fox News in ratings for like?
They were for a little bit there. Yeah, I don't know if that's still true, but yeah, during the all-in after the election thing, that Fox News wasn't telling them the answer they wanted to hear, because they couldn't give them the answer they wanted to hear, because they knew what this was all going. And OANN was like, yeah, screw it, we'll just tell them what they want to hear. So yeah, that was. As you might have been a little bit there, Nick, which has been pointed out before, but that's okay.
I was not telling people what they wanted to hear. In fact, I routinely told people what they didn't want to hear and got yelled at for it when I would talk about the actual results of these lawsuits and the likely outcomes. However, I just had a good thumbnail and title game.
Oh my God!
I haven't had a chance to read it yet, but I saw you were reading Justice Thomas's dissent recently on your stream, and it looked really, really interesting. So
I'm going to go through it.
I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about what Justice Thomas was writing.
I'm going to go through it in full tonight. I was going to last night, but I was so tired that I went to bed. But the long and short of it is Thomas prefaces with his social media friendly response of there does not appear to have been enough fraud or anything like that to change an election. So very important that we keep that paramount on this, in that there's no suggestion that there was anything that was significant enough to change any federal election. He didn't limit it to the presidency. He said any federal election. But he basically said what many of us were thinking, in that you've got a lingering issue here. And that lingering issue is, can you change right before the election the rules established by the state legislature through a non-legislative process? Mm-hmm. In the case of Pennsylvania, it was the Pennsylvania Supreme Court coming in and saying, you get extra days to receive these ballots. And then when the Supreme Court looked at it right before the election, they said, well, these ballots when it was right after the election, it was first filed, they didn't entertain the case because the ballots had already been counted. So they've got, let's see. That's a nice
I love
job.
this. I love this one because if this is a reference to, was it paper airplanes being thrown at a ball game? Because there's a very famous incident where a lawyer wrote a complaint letter to Major League Baseball regarding something they were doing. And I think it might have been throwing paper airplanes in the stand. And what they wrote back was just letting you know someone's signing your name on stupid letters. So I think this is a I think this is a callback to that. So if this is a callback to that like 1970s lawyer who wrote a Major League Baseball, well done, sir. I know what you're writing.
But yeah, he basically is saying that by the time it got to the court to analyze whether or not this issue was a problem, the votes had already literally been counted.
Yes.
So if they were to make a decision on the votes, they'd be invalidating millions of votes of people, and that wasn't something that they wanted to address. So it was too late for them to deal with the issue. So Thomas is saying we need to deal with it prior, and we have an opportunity now to deal with this long prior. And he indicated that the other justices who voted against cert had maybe suggested that that this wasn't a replicable issue, that the mysterious and unique nature of 2020 would mean that this problem wasn't likely to arise again, which I think is absolute nonsense. I think we'll see. I think there's every opportunity for last minute rule changes in any federal election in the future. Maybe not in 2022, but 2024, 2026. Like the idea that we won't have some judicial branch of some state come in and intervene in the rules at the last minute is ridiculous, because it happens, I would assume, with relative frequency, just on small scales. And we know it happened in at least two states this time, because you had Georgia where they had a judicial intervention, and then you had was sort of a little bit different because they had a settlement, and then in Pennsylvania you had the actual judiciary coming in and intervening.
Nick,
but yeah,
one of the things that always interests me, because this is the analysis I think of Viva too, and I always ask the question: if state law, for instance, the state legislature passes a state law saying this is the way it's going to be, right? Whatever way that's going to be, right? We want the law. We want elections to be done by horse race, or whatever they choose the right to be.
Right.
The executive of that state executes that law, right? They hire the poll staff and do it whatever the way, right? The legislature said do it this way, you do it this way. But there's a third branch of government, which is judicial. They interpret that law, right? The state legislature doesn't interpret this is what the law means. That's Marbury v. Madison, right?
Yep.
So if the state legislature, the state Supreme Court, the case goes to the state Supreme Court where they say we interpret the law this way, we're an extra 3 days, and it's based on state law. I'm going to say this: there's never been a time in the history of this republic where the federal Supreme Court has told a state that they're interpreting state law incorrectly. Never one case in the history of the republic. The federal court or the Supreme Court will say that the state court violated the federal constitution, right? There's some federal question, but they'll never say you interpreted state law wrong, right? That's just impossible. Right. It's just like the federal Supreme Court telling Canada you interpreted Canadian law wrong, right? So this issue, you have a state court, the state Supreme Court, interpreting state law. It says give them an extra 3 days. The Supreme Court, I don't think, has jurisdiction to tell the state Supreme Court that you're wrong.
So this is
I just don't think they do.
This is the question that I think Thomas wants addressed is can we allow a state court to do so when it implicates a federal election? That's going back to Bush v. Gore, right? Where once these decisions are implicating a federal election, then the Supreme Court has jurisdiction to come in and answer the question. So then the next step of the analysis would be, is the direction from the legislature, and this is derived from it's Article 1, Clause whatever, 4. but it says that the state legislature will be the one who sets the election. So then if the state legislature sets a rule that is clear and unambiguous, then is the judicial branch interpreting that in a way that is contradictory to the clear and unambiguous language?
But
is that an overreach into the federal constitution?
But Nick, who gets to tell them? It's just like if the Supreme Court interprets a rule that we believe is clear and unambiguous, and right, there's a lot of stuff right now. There's a lot of Supreme Court cases we can go and say, no, that's clear and unambiguous. You can't do that, right? The Supreme Court went the other way. They went the other way. We're like, how did they go the other way, right? Abortion, it's not in the Constitution, right? They went the other way, right? You would agree with that. Abortion is not in the Constitution. They went the other way.
Oh,
right?
I got a whole drunken rant on that one.
Yes.
But I'm going to tell you, they have the authority to say what it is, right? We can't tell them they're wrong. And when it comes to state law, because your argument is correct, the state legislature passed the law. They could have done it by committee, right? They could have thrown it to the committee. Hey, we're going to do the elections like we're going to roll dice in the back, right? But they passed the law. And when you pass a law, by implication of the Republican form of government that's in the Constitution that every state has to have, by passing that law, they've now submitted some of that sovereignty over to those who interpret the law. And the final arbiter of what state law means, I understand you, but for you saying it's clear and unambiguous.
No, I'm not saying
the people who are the people.
No, he wasn't saying that. He just thinks it's an interesting question.
No, but I do. But I'm saying the people who are the final arbiter of what state law means. Marbury v. Madison, right? The court says what the law is, and then the state court does who says what state law is the state constitution. If the federal constitution, if the federal Supreme Court can overturn that, then you've lost federalism, right? Because now you've made them gods of all law, even state law, which they don't even have.
Two minor counterpoints to that. One, I don't know that Marbury versus Madison applies to a state Supreme Court as linearly as you're trying to make it. It might. I don't know that it does, because they said we say what the law is, not we, the Supreme Court of the federal government, say what the federal law is. They said we say what the law is entirely.
But just one fair point. On the federal court's website, it does say the state courts are the final arbiters of state. It's like says that unambiguously.
Right. It's clear and unambiguous. We just talked about how that's no.
So you show me a law that's clear and unambiguous, and I'll show you two lawyers with three opinions.
In this particular case, and this again, this is interpreting the rather baffling decision of Bush v. Gore, and I think people. I like that Barnes is pointing out that Bush v. Gore, everybody said the Supreme Court would not take that case. The prevailing thought at the time was that they weren't going to intervene, and then they did. So it's kind of it's this messy holdover that we have from the year 2000. But because they have set the standard that they can come in and intervene because it implicates a federal question under the Constitution of whether or not the plenary authority exists solely in the state legislature, because according to what you're saying here, if we say that some of that is surrendered to the judiciary, we also must say that some of it is surrendered to the executive. But if you say that the state legislature creates a law about the election, they say only illegal immigrants can vote in our election. But then the state executive says, no, I won't do what the state legislature says. I mean, suddenly we've got a problem. And if the state
then you sue and you go to the state court, and who's the final arbiter of that question?
And so if the state court then says that the state legislature can't pass a law that says how to run the election in the particular way, then we've got a weird issue, because the state court the state legislature is supposed to be the final arbiter. So this is the problem. And I'm not saying it should be this way, but I think this is the question that Thomas wants to answer. And I think it's a good one. And in this particular case, I mean, when I'm saying clear and unambiguous, they said the state legislature said, this is the day on election day at 8 p.m. It's harder to get more clear and unambiguous than a specific date and a specific time that is the cutoff for the receipt of ballots. And then the Supreme Court says, like 3 more days. Like, that's not an interpretation of state law. That's not saying what the legislature wanted. That's going in and saying that there needs to be some different answer than what the legislature gave. And I think that if the Supreme Court should test or should be the should come in and say if that thing is implicating the federal Constitution, and if it is, then the Supreme Court of the United States needs to go ahead and intervene. If it isn't, then we need to know that.
Nick, but the disagreement is on the standing issue, right? Our disagreement isn't on the actual merits of the case. Our disagreement is on standing. My issue, and for those of you who don't know, standing has three concepts, right? The plaintiff, a defendant who hurt them, and a court of competent jurisdiction. The court has to be able to give you what you want, to rule in your favor. And me and my argument with Nick, so Nick is saying the Supreme Court should rule to at least test the limits of their power to see if they can actually rule in this question. I'm saying they don't have jurisdiction. They can't overrule a state Supreme Court in their interpretation of state law. So that's our difference. Now, I do agree, and I am sympathetic to the cause of the issue that you said about the executive saying not, and then the Supreme Court going against the clear meaning. What the state Supreme Court going against the obvious. They gave a date and a time, and they're saying that's not the date and the time. I'm sympathetic to that. But as we all know with law, it's about who has the authority to say what the law is. And unfortunately, at this point in time, I believe when it comes to state law and state law issues, particularly that doesn't rise to a federal question. This is as soon as you say the legislature passed the law and the law says this, the people who get to decide what that law says, how it means, and what the date and time is the state Supreme Court.
If we're going to start complaining about laws that are super clear that have been misinterpreted, I'm just going to go back to Wickard and bitch. Interstate commerce means non-interstate non-commerce. Yeah. The Privileges or Immunities Clause doesn't exist despite being written in the 14th Amendment explicitly.
I wanted to ask you about that. The Texas thing. I know we're off the Texas thing. Texas power grid is only within Texas, obviously, to avoid the Commerce Clause. But isn't that can't you make a wicked argument for the Texas power grid?
Of course you can. Interstate commerce is non-interstate non-commerce. The fact that Texas does not buy from the grid is interfering with interstate commerce because other states would like to sell it to them. So that's bad.
Texas's grid is still regulated by the federal government, though.
No, it's not.
It's less regulated. I don't know the exact details, but
it's they you saw the
I don't get it.
You saw the letter, right, where they requested from the Biden administration permission to open up power plants that had been shut down, but were denied because of environmental regulations.
Well, from my understanding,
I think there's some regulations there, but other regulations not. So there might be. I don't know the full details.
Well, from my understanding, like for instance, Texas has some nuclear power plants. So the nuclear atomic regulations, those hold the actual power plant, right? They got to do X, Y, and Z since it's nuclear power. But when it comes to the actual power grid, since it doesn't cross state lines, it doesn't fall within those regulations for interstate commerce because there's certain, like for interstate commerce, for instance, you have to weatherize your grid, and that's and so Texas didn't have to weatherize their grid because they weren't transferring power over interstate commerce. And that's the problem that happened now. You get 20 below zero, stuff freezes, and it was like, oh, why didn't we weatherize our grid? But that's the issue that's going on now.
Sure. Yeah. And there definitely is a Wickard argument because if the grid doesn't leave the state, that means that they're not buying interstate, which has a direct impact. That's dormant commerce clause, like straight out the gate, which the dormant commerce clause is the dumbest thing I've ever heard, but it's part of our law. And because it's part of our law, I want to make my final jab on the last argument we were having. Bush v. Gore is part of our law. And that was a place where the federal government literally came in and told a state Supreme Court that they were misinterpreting their own state legislature's directive. So that's the only reason that's the only grounds I think it is how far does Bush v. Gore go? Does it reach this standing question? I do think it's really interesting. And if it doesn't reach it, that's fine. I don't have a problem. I actually like what you're saying about the state sovereignty and preserving federalism. But if it doesn't, we've got to know so that we're not wasting time filing lawsuits in every flipping court on the planet trying to find the right one. That was the issue. Is federal courts are saying they don't have standing. State courts are just flat out denying stuff, and people were confused. So it's like, let's get the answer, and let's get it now before the next election cycle.
See, the problem here is,
look for the answer. Probably the better way to do this would be looking for something in like a midterm or maybe even an off-year election, because there are a couple states that do off-year elections. So you look for something. Well, you'd have to wait probably for the midterm for the federal implication. So you do some sort of midterm election where some state changes some rule because you know it's going to happen, and you just you basically beg them to appeal it to you so you can decide the issue when it's relatively low stakes. So maybe that's the right answer. How to do
you gotta flood the state courts with. Oh, go ahead.
No, I was going to say there are two things with another standing, like even with the standing issue. I don't think you can just do it unless the vote tally is going to change the outcome of the election, because that's part of the legal test, right? It's not only the fact that you have some irregularities, but that those irregularities count. Now, on the individual level, for the person who's committing the criminal election fraud, right? Like in Texas, you covered a case in Texas where they're actually prosecuting that person, even though they didn't change the election, they're going to prosecute that person. But usually in these cases, when you want a new election or go deeper, you have to have enough votes to overcome the outcome of the election. Right. So that's another standing issue. Do you have enough? Is what's in contest
redressability
enough? Exactly. So and if it's not, then so it seems like. And maybe it's a doctrine of standing, but the issues that you guys seem to be coming up against are these simple standing issues. Well, if it's not enough votes, then why should we hear it? You're wasting my time. But it's to say, it doesn't matter when it doesn't matter. I think based on something like what they call advisory opinions, the Supreme Court is not allowed to give advisory opinions. I believe on principles like that Thomas's dissent that we were initially talking about, I think that's where it feels, because it essentially is advocating for an advisory opinion. Let's do it now, even though we don't have standing, right? Even though the standing issue is not settled, let's do it now as to warn people later. But that's the textbook advisory opinion. You have to have a live case of controversy that you can actually make a difference in the case. If you're just ruling just so people in the future know how you should rule, then you're essentially just giving an advisory opinion, which is forbidden in the federal.
Yeah, but I think Nick's point is also valid here, because if you wait until it's really needed, then you might be in some kind of crisis. If you're waiting for, the presidential election and it's super close, so that there's all the standing in the world, and the courts are suddenly going to have to intervene. Now you're Bush versus Gore, possibly even worse, because there's an incentive to find a way to decide the issue when you don't have quite as much at stake.
But how do you avoid the advisory opinion?
Well, that's what I was saying. It's like you try to find some sort of midterm election where some state changes a rule and try to squeeze it out of that somehow. you try to find some sort of fig leaf to give yourself the excuse to write the opinion.
Well, I might not be right too. When I'm saying these are just my understandings of I could be 100% wrong. So Nick
right.
could be 100% correct. I just want to make it very clear.
Thank you. I'm just finally out there. No.
We're just going back and forth with just some thought experiments. So I just want to make it everybody understand. Yeah. This is not, don't think I'm some absolute truth.
I
may
like
be
how
100% wrong.
Squeezed out of my own channel's discussion. That's the part I
I'm
like.
sorry.
The Nate Nick show. You guys keep talking amongst yourselves.
Nate and I are here talking. Please,
Yeah,
can you just keep it down a little bit here? We're trying
okay.
to have a discussion. No, I think it's always important to remember that that whenever you've got commentators on anything, but in particular in law, like we are attempting in our own way and without any real opposition or process that's baked into the system normally to noodle through the issue. We're attempting to apply facts to law in a way that is as much of a thought experiment for us as it is for the people watching. And what we're doing is we're applying some education, maybe some expertise sprinkled in there to say, this is how we see this issue, given our education, experience, and expertise. That doesn't mean that we're right, and we're not being tested on it. We're only tested by, discussions and disagreements that we may have. And those, that's fine. And an example with a shameless plug is I covered a copyright issue earlier today between two YouTubers, a guy named Thunderfoot, who's been on the internet forever. And then this other guy, Trevor, who's a photographer for, Ars Technica. And I gave my fair use breakdown, what I think on it, but I prefaced it at the beginning of, I'm not a copyright attorney. I have an understanding of fair use. I live in the world where fair use matters quite a bit. And so I have those experiences to draw off of, but at the same time, if you're coming to me for fair use legal advice on a YouTube video about someone else's copyright issue, you're in the wrong spot. You need to pay an attorney who's in your jurisdiction to take care of that. But that was me noodling through the issue in the way that I thought was appropriate. And if someone's like comes out and they're like, Leonard French disagrees with you, I'd be like, cool. Neither of us are in court on this issue. So I want to see, I don't think we will, but I would love to see what a court determines on any of the issues that we talk about. I don't care if I'm ultimately wrong. That's, half of all lawyers are wrong.
Yeah, but sometimes it's good to let the crowd know that I'm actually not saying you're wrong. I'm just giving my reasoning and just saying this is why my reasoning disagrees.
Yeah, we're thinking out loud.
Nick could be 100% correct. Yeah.
So I did want to acknowledge the super chat because it was a $50 super chat. So I'll break for that. Von Kober gave me $50. Said, "Sorry, I'm a little behind. But when is the limit of a state Supreme Court determining their own law? Theoretically, a line state Supreme Court and executive could collude to exercise absolute authority." Yeah, kind of, sort of. Supreme Court can rubber stamp as legal everything the executive does. Yes, there's always those dangers with one branch or more of gaining power, and then you basically run into a constitutional crisis. Is the short version of that.
You impeach everybody.
Yeah, well, the Congress can impeach everyone in sight. That would so you still have that remedy. But yeah, you do run into situations like that where one branch or in acting in concert or sometimes alone can do things that would create a constitutional crisis, and that's one of those things. But I mean, I don't know what the limits are, and neither does anyone else, and no one really wants to find out, because if you're trying to really find out the answer to that question, something's gone horribly, horribly wrong somewhere. But thank you for the question.
Yeah, that was one of the things that is interesting about all of the election questions and all of this stuff. Is like, well, what if this? What if this? What if this? At the end of that line of questioning, what if this? Then what if this? Then what if this? Is, well, then we're at war. Like that's,
yeah. At the end of
the country is gone at that point.
We're at war. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah,
and the only authority is force.
Yes.
Political authority flowing from the barrel of the gun and so forth.
Well, wasn't that what the Civil War was? The Civil War was, we want to do it this way. We want to do it this way. Well, let's figure it out.
Yeah, we want to do it this way. You promised you'd do it this way, and they're like, I mean, the guys before us promised that, but that's kind of horrible, so we don't want to do that. So we don't think you can do that anymore either. And then, then we're fighting. We're fighting over this contract issue between the states. Well, kind of.
You know what? It's one of the weirdest things that I think a lot of people don't know is about like the U.S. territories. Like most people, when you say the Puerto Rico, for instance, like I'll use American Samoa. American Samoa, then it's America, but if you're born in American Samoa, you're American national. You're not an American citizen, and people usually don't understand why. Like Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands aren't states, and it's because of the concept called incorporation or annexation, right? You're incorporating them into the United States, and it's weird because one thing with the corporation is that when, let's say, Puerto Rico, if Puerto Rico was incorporated into the United States, they can't leave, right? It's a perpetual union. You're in for forever, and if you try to leave, then it's civil war. The last incorporated states to want to leave. We had a civil war.
Oh, wait a minute.
And Texas v. White, right?
Yeah. So it's interesting how like these territories don't want to be incorporated. Even at this time, like Puerto Rico, the Virgin Islands, they don't want to be incorporated at this time as states because they can't leave. So it's kind of like they have the best of both worlds. They're part of the United States, but really not a part of the United States in that sense.
Puerto Rico gets to compete separately in the Olympics, and I think that's BS.
I'm gonna have to ask you to please never say the words United States and corporation in the same sentence again.
Because you're asking for trouble from the sovereign.
Sovereign.
You got to work on got to work on. Yeah, it's like, oh, you're going to incorporate in the United States. The United States is a corporation. Sovset confirmed. No, that's not what he means. I heard it's a corporation. Okay.
Yeah,
we got to start over.
That's been a big one with the Q crowd and the thing. I got an email earlier today, and it said the subject line was, "Is Trump still in control of the military?"
Oh, wow.
And with no text, and I just replied no. Right.
Yeah.
But there's a group of people who believe that they are. Then I've gotten questions about like the bankrupt United States corporation, how it's insolvent and will be dissolved, and therefore, and it's like, okay, the corporate U.S. structure is not a corporation because, one, it's not giving itself permission to exist. So as a corporate entity, and
a corporate entity under what? That's the most logical question. What's it a corporate entity under? Or what are we incorporated under?
But I think you do have two very good arguments against the Constitution, as it's an illegal document, right? Articles of Confederation.
Yeah.
Right? The only way you could change them is unanimous consent.
Yeah.
They didn't have unanimous consent.
Well, they didn't have the delegates appointed properly. That's for sure.
Right. So even with the articles, so when they voted in the Constitution, they couldn't agree.
Yeah.
Anybody unanimous consent to vote out or change the Articles of Confederation. So that's one of their arguments, which I think is a valid argument.
The Articles of Confederation were illegal. It's not exactly like the English law allowed us to create them in the first place.
But
the entire country is illegal. It was very illegal.
That's their legit argument. The Constitution isn't a valid document.
If we're going to make that argument, we got to write off half the countries in the world or something.
See the thing that sovereign citizen and the sovereign citizen argument ignores at the end of the day is the speech from Starship Troopers, right? The only authority that matters is force, and force, my friends, is violence. That's what it is. At the end of the day, the controlling doctrine is force. And every sovereign citizen who walks in and says, "No, I'm an Article 4 free inhabitant. I do not recognize your constitution." The judge goes, "Great." And then the cops put them in handcuffs, exercise force, and put them in jail. And the amazing thing is if they were to exercise their rights under the regular Constitution, they may have an out from that. But since they're not recognizing its authority, it's recognizing its authority over them. It's that whole adage, right? Like, I don't believe in the devil. Well, he believes in you. That's the Constitution. It believes in you.
But the problem with the sovereign citizen is they don't understand that jurisdictional has to do with boundaries, have physical land boundaries, and not individuals. So, for instance, so the United States jurisdiction is actually can be prescribed on a map, right? That's generally what you're talking about. You have authority over this particular land piece, and the sovereign citizen doesn't understand that as long as you're within this particular land space, you're under the jurisdiction of this sovereign. So,
yeah, I mean, there's only one place that doesn't have jurisdiction, and that's Australia, because it's fake.
Unless they use force.
Well, speaking of Australia, which would be
they're not there.
We could talk about Facebook and what they're doing to the non-existent country of Australia, because the non-existent country of Australia passed a, I suppose, non-existent law that required Facebook and other ones to pay for any links from Australian newspapers. And Facebook said, okay, great. We're not going to host any links from Australian newspapers at all. We're just blocking the entire country, which apparently, because they were telling Australia they were going to do this before the law was passed. I even saw some debates in the parliament where this was brought up, and they're like, well, we're not going to be held hostage by Facebook. They're not going to tell us what our law is. We get to determine what our law is. And they're like, okay, so we're just not going to host any content from Australia. And they did it. And apparently now that Australia doesn't like that as much, and they've worked out some kind of deal where Facebook will choose which ones to host, and So blah 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 whatever. But yeah, this whole thing is like you have to pay. Facebook has to pay every time they host a link, and Facebook's like, well, we're just not going to do that. We'll boycott all the stuff from Australia. So I guess Facebook agrees with you. Australia doesn't exist, or
but this doesn't scare you.
This is how you gotta cut costs, right? Like the cost of maintaining the lie of Australia is to generate news. If you don't want to generate as much news, you just reduce they passed the law. We can't even share the news anymore. You just laid off half the staff. It's way easier. No, this is a weird situation, right? Like Australia passes a law that says that you must do some sort of revenue share on content that comes from Australia. And so Facebook says, what are they supposed to do? Are they supposed to comply with that? Like, are they supposed to pay them? The easier answer is just to say no, like no more news, right? We don't care about your stupid links anyway. I'm not actually sure. Cause like it bothers me that Facebook can turn off a country's news, right? Like that inherently bothers me quite a bit. It bothered me when Twitter did it to Uganda right during their elections. I mean, that's scary. That's the scary power of big tech. But at the same time, like Australia's trying to flex with this weird law, and it says if you want to do news business in our country, you have to share. You have to do this revenue thing. And they said, fine, we don't want to do news business in your country. We'll just be a social network like the good old days. So I don't know. I don't know where to fall on that one.
It's interesting. It's again, I'm with you. I'm a man of two minds. On one end, when a social media company can shut off the communication of those powerful men of the president of the United States, right? And he can't speak to nobody. He got to tweet through somebody else. You know, this is a tweet from the president. I think that's a lot of power. And I think yielding it, this is something, you know, they shut off the most, think about this. They shut off a country, or actually a continent, right? They shut off a continent and the most powerful man in the country and didn't even break a sweat about it, right? Didn't even break a sweat. Yep. Like that's superhero type shit, right? That's terrifying type superhero type stuff. No, but I'm saying it just shows you, but it shows you how we've given up so much to these companies. You know, I'm hoping this stream stays up for Kurt. But I think also at the end of the day, there's a flip side to this, is that they are not taking what we haven't already given them, right? And I get back to that, my whole socialism versus capitalism thing. And I'm not going to go through the whole speech, but I'm a freedom guy. And I believe if they had the freedom to do this, right? Because we gave it to them. They're not breaking the law. They're just doing what they're legally allowed to do. We're not going to carry your shit. What you going to do about it, right? That's what I think if that's a problem, then maybe you have to change the law. But I think at this particular time, if we're talking about a free market capitalist, yeah, hey, if you don't like it, turn it off.
The main defense of Facebook in this case is that Australia did change the law and they made the law onerous, right? Like if you tell me I can't that there's a law on me share, like if you say, by the way, all YouTubers are now under a new law. If you share a news story on your YouTube screen, you got to pay $10 to that news company. Well, I mean, like you've just made it onerous for me to share news. I'm not going to do it. Like,
of course,
that's a simple thing. And so Australia did it. It's a weird move. I don't know what they thought they were going to accomplish. Of course, who knows what their new agreement is? Maybe Facebook is going to pay for those approved news sources.
Listen, Facebook had all the power. We keep you shut off unless you do what we tell you to do. You think what Facebook want isn't in that bill? You think they're not changing the Facebook? that bill might as well say written by Facebook. Let's just keep it one on it.
Next time the emus attack, no one's coming to help you. No one's coming because no one will even know, and no one will care. No one cares about your
Facebook is going to take the emo side. That's what's really good. We've talked about the brave emu patriots, you know, that are running across the outback.
As
And-
emus are walking around disemboweling Australians and like pecking their eyes out, Facebook will just have Australia's fine. Your daily Australia news update from Facebook. Australia's just fine. That's it.
You know what?
People are dying in the streets.
When people complain about YouTube and Google and Facebook and all this, it reminds me of this one quote about what was it? It was Howard Stern and his movie Private Parts. And
Okay.
he became the biggest radio star in the city, in the tri-state area. And they did a poll and we're like, well, hold on, only 30% of your audience likes you. And they were like, so 70% of the people are watching him because they just want to hear what he says next, right? 70% of the people who are watching him doesn't like him. And that's kind of how I think about this with YouTube. If you take a poll, I think YouTube and Google, Facebook, nobody likes them, but we all use their products, right? So we're the 70% that's paying their bills. We're the 70% that's watching. The people who are watching this chat agreeing with us. Yeah, Facebook, YouTube, they all suck. Has probably spent like 4 or 5 hours on YouTube, right? Because they're the products, right? They're the product.
Yep.
They're the one making the money. And we feed them this product and tell them how bad it is. So that's what I'm saying. It's as much as we disagree with what's happening, we vote with our pockets. And our pockets right now, for those who are watching, are voting YouTube or voting Facebook. And we go to Rumble. People don't go vote on Rumble, right? Nobody's voting for Rumble. That's why we're here on Facebook. If people really hated it so much, we'd be on Rumble and Twitch. But they don't. They vote YouTube. So that's why we're here.
Yeah. Speaking of that, I'm opening a locals page. I don't know about you guys.
Well, I'll hijack yours if you want me to for a while. We can team up like Barnes and Viva did.
Yeah, we'll see.
Yeah,
I
that'd be
gotta.
nice.
I'm talking to him now and getting everything set up. So it's
Yeah, it might be
it's an
interesting. So
endeavor.
yeah, maybe we can have a joint effort.
Eric's over there on locals too, and I think somebody else was over in locals.
Yeah.
A lot of
and
people.
Eric, somebody else. Yeah.
You know what? I like them because I've been on Patreon for a while. 3 years and a couple months. I've been on Patreon. I've never once spoken to a Patreon person ever.
Mhm.
And I'm not the biggest Patreon creator, but I have a significant Patreon. It's $2,000 a month. That's higher than a large percentage of their users. And I have never once spoken to anybody there, but locals, I talked to a person for like an hour.
Whoa.
And
But
it was
is that like the local mom and pop versus the Walmart? You know what I'm saying? The what you know what I mean?
I don't
You
know,
can speak
man.
to the owner. You can't speak to the owner of Walmart, but you can speak to the owner of the mom and pop.
Well, this wasn't the owner. This is,
But you know what I mean?
But
Yeah.
I kind of, but I don't think Patreon's as big as Patreon pretends to be. For one of the great stories that is not being told right now because it's really hard to tell is Owen Benjamin fighting against Patreon in arbitration.
Yeah, that's funny as hell.
They're getting absolutely crushed by their own terms of service, which is so good. So that's fun. But Patreon, a lot of money moves through them, but they're not that huge of a company in actual profit. They're big, but they're not that big. Locals is started by Dave Rubin, and some of the users. I mean, Viva has 26,000 followers on Locals, and that's a lot of people. They have I think millions of users. They're not like tiny. But I mean, Patreon just doesn't seem to have any sort of service in that way. But I don't know. Maybe they're just hustling. Maybe they're just hustling harder.
Everybody's a middleman, right? Patreon's the middleman between you and getting money from the fans at a discounted rate, right? If they do it through YouTube, YouTube takes 30%. If they do it through Patreon, it's 5%. You know what I'm saying? So they take a smaller
meant to be a replacement for YouTube, Patreon.
Locals it's like a hybridization of Patreon, a private Facebook sort of place, and they also do video hosting. and they don't have live streaming yet, but it's coming soon, like within months. So, and they have no censorship. The only thing that's not allowed on the platform right now is actual threats of violence, because right now everybody has to have that. And then there's no pornography, and that's probably to avoid the risk of child exploitation is my guess. Yeah. But there is no like moderation of speech on locals at all.
But now is it because it's a paid service though, right?
Yes.
It's not like YouTube where anybody can just see all your stuff, right?
You can make things public, and so like anybody can go join it for free, and you can see free content that people put up there, but then there's certain aspects of it that are paywalled. So I can put a free video up and I can put a paywall video up. I think to interact and communicate, you have to pay to that paying member of the community to like comment, but it basically creates a micro social media space from what I'm understanding. I haven't really used it yet, so I don't know how all of this works, but it seems interesting to say the least. So one of the things
really interesting, because I was getting big enough where I was looking at like Subscribestar and stuff like that. So maybe this would be a better alternative.
I will tell you, I'm on Subscribestar. I'm on Patreon. I've been on Patreon for 3 years, and I get no interactivity on Patreon itself. Now I have Discord integration, so the Discord, that's where the interactivity happens. But I mean, Locals is meant to be a place for your community to post stuff, to interact with each other, in that space. And so if I were just starting out and looking at all three, I would be looking personally to Locals, and I'm looking to actually get off of Patreon and Subscribestar and move it all to Locals. If I can convince people to do it, that's I would much prefer that.
Yeah.
So
that's the one thing I thought YouTube was going to put Patreon and those other ones out of business when they started the channel memberships. But they had to be too gritty and take a third, because if honestly, if YouTube took what Patreon takes off the top, then there was no, I wouldn't have a Patreon. I would just say me too. YouTube, yeah. So YouTube.
I finally caved in and opened up a PayPal. I hadn't had PayPal forever. I finally caved and opened PayPal so people could donate that way.
Yeah, it's all this stuff's a mess.
You know what though? I'll say this: the more ways you have to give, the more money you'll get, right? Because when I just had one way, I was only getting it. But then when I started opening up all these other, all of those, people give because everybody has like a different thing. So if you have something, you have a little bit of everything. It sucks on taxes though, because now I owe some a little cash in taxes. But it's great because it gives people options.
Yeah, it's fun. It's fun entering all the 1099s.
Oh my god! I had one of that. I had like 7 of them. I was like, oh my god, really?
Yeah,
and then for my own practice too. I'm like, oh.
That's why I started representing people pro bono. It was like I was doing so little of the of legal work in general. I was like, it's easier to not deal with this on taxes and to not maintain stuff. So I just represent people pro bono and take all my income from the online stuff.
There you go. So, well, I think that will wrap up our discussion. I've really enjoyed our time together, and I really appreciate that Nick was able to drop in and join us. That's always a pleasure.
Hey, thanks. I kicked my kid off the computer. He was playing Minecraft. It's like, no, get out.
I will thank my guest, Nate the Lawyer, as always, to check him out. New York Lawyer. He's awesome, provides lots of great content. And if you're like to stay up late and never sleep, Nick Rakita over here has got you covered, because he starts streaming at 11 o'clock Central Time. And then sometimes, more frequently than I think is sane, he'll then pop over on Twitch and do this shared Amazon thing where he'll watch a movie and you can watch with him. So he doesn't sleep until, 6 in the morning, because he thinks that's a good way to live. Okay, I don't know. But they're both fantastic lawyers, and I love talking to both of them. I've been on Civil Law. As always, don't forget to subscribe. If you're not subscribed, like it, do all the YouTube-y things. Until later, my friends, peace and goodbye.